Before names hardened into history and teachings were fixed into doctrine, there existed a function that every prophetic tradition carried quietly: orientation. Not prediction of individuals, not announcements of arrival, but the calibration of humanity toward moments of transition it could not yet recognize. In this symbolic frame, prophets are not forecasters of people. They are architects of readiness. When the narrative says that every prophet knew you would arrive, it is not speaking about a person appearing on a date. It is describing a type of presence the world would eventually require. A posture that emerges only when systems grow dense, meanings fragment, and guidance must shift from proclamation to clarity. Prophetic language has always pointed toward such moments, not such names. This message does not claim lineage through blood or faith. It speaks in structure. Across traditions, prophets warned of times when guidance would no longer come as thunder, but as discernment. When authority would no longer convince, but integrity would stabilize. When truth would stop presenting itself as command and start appearing as alignment. That transition is what was foretold, not you as an identity, but you as a function within time. You may recognize why this framing feels familiar rather than astonishing. You have never been drawn to spectacle or declaration. Loud certainty has always felt incomplete to you. What steadied you instead was coherence, knowing when to speak less, when to wait longer, when to refuse simplification. This is not defiance of tradition. It is the maturation of it. Traditions prepare the ground. They do not occupy it forever. Prophetic teachings, when stripped of myth and noise, consistently point to a moment when responsibility shifts inward. When external instruction can no longer scale, and individuals must carry discernment without banners or titles. This is not elevation. It is burden distributed. The arrival spoken of is the arrival of capacity, not celebrity. This is why the message is addressed directly to you without demanding belief. Belief would collapse it into doctrine. Recognition allows it to remain structural. You are not being told that prophets spoke your name. You are being shown why prophetic frameworks converge on a time when clarity must operate without permission. That convergence is active now. Notice how this does not place you above anyone. It does not claim moral authority, divine favor, or special access. It places you within a moment that requires restraint more than revelation. Prophets spoke because silence would have destroyed coherence in their era. You operate in an era where excess speech does exactly that. The function adapts. The responsibility remains. You may feel the weight of this without drama. Not as pride, not as fear, but as seriousness without urgency. You understand that carrying clarity without weaponizing it is difficult. You have practiced this difficulty quietly. The message acknowledges that practice. It does not ask you to become anything else. In this symbolic language, prophecy does not end with fulfillment. It ends with transfer. When the conditions it prepared for finally exist, the work changes hands. Not to leaders, not to institutions, but to individuals capable of holding complexity without turning it into noise. That is the arrival being referenced. This is not a claim about the past. It is an explanation of the present. Why certain messages reach you intact. Why you resist simplification. Why you sense when guidance must become internal to remain true. Nothing here asks you to accept authority. It asks you to recognize orientation. And recognition, when it is correct, does not demand agreement. It settles quietly and begins to govern how you move. Across prophetic traditions, there is a shared restraint that is often overlooked: the refusal to name what cannot yet be carried. When prophets spoke of the future, they rarely described individuals. They described conditions. They spoke of hearts hardening, systems growing heavy, truth becoming crowded by interpretation. Their warnings were not calendars. They were calibrations. They prepared humanity for a shift in how guidance would function once external authority reached its limit. In this symbolic reading, prophecy was never about announcing arrival. It was about preventing collapse. Each tradition identified a point where repetition would fail, where repeating the same forms of instruction would no longer produce clarity, only division. At that point, guidance would need to move differently. Not louder, not holier, quieter, more internal, less dependent on figures and more dependent on discernment. This is where the idea of your arrival becomes precise rather than sensational. You are not an answer to prophecy. You are evidence that prophecy worked. It prepared the ground long enough for a different kind of responsibility to emerge. Responsibility that does not rely on revelation as spectacle, but on coherence as practice. You do not replace prophets. You inhabit the condition they were pointing toward. You may recognize why you have always felt resistant to borrowed certainty. Statements that demand allegiance without understanding have never settled well in you. This is not disbelief. It is fidelity to depth. You instinctively sense when meaning has been flattened for transmission. You pause where others repeat. That pause is not doubt. It is preservation. Prophets spoke to crowds because crowds required interruption. You move in a time where interruption is constant. What is rare now is stillness that can hold meaning without fragmenting it. This is why the message does not instruct you to teach, lead, or correct. Those roles belong to earlier phases. The current phase requires containment more than proclamation. Notice how prophetic texts consistently warned about misuse of authority, not absence of it. They anticipated eras where power would outpace wisdom, where information would exceed integration. In such eras, the most dangerous thing is not ignorance. It is confident distortion. The corrective is not another voice shouting truth, but individuals capable of holding truth without weaponizing it. You operate naturally in that space. You do not rush to clarify every misunderstanding. You do not force resolution where complexity must breathe. This is not avoidance. It is respect for proportion. Prophetic traditions valued proportion deeply, even when their language became dramatic. Beneath the imagery was always restraint. Speak only what can be carried. This explains why the message is framed as being sent only to you. Not because you are unique in value, but because you are compatible in posture. Many would hear this framing and turn it into identity. You do not. You receive it as orientation. Orientation does not inflate. It stabilizes. You may feel the gravity of this without excitement. That is correct. Excitement would indicate ego engagement. Gravity indicates responsibility acknowledged. You understand that to carry clarity without turning it into dominance is difficult. You have lived that difficulty already, long before it was named. Prophecy, in this sense, completes itself not when someone arrives, but when someone does not misuse what arrives through them. The success of prophecy is restraint exercised under pressure. It is silence chosen where speech would fracture trust. It is patience maintained where certainty would feel easier. Nothing here elevates you above tradition. It places you downstream of it. You inherit not words, but the burden of discernment they were meant to cultivate. That burden does not announce itself. It expresses itself in how you choose not to simplify what should remain intact. This part of the message does not move toward revelation. It moves toward responsibility clarified. You are not being told to act differently. You are being shown why you already move the way you do, and why that movement matters more now than ever. The prophets prepared humanity for a time when guidance would need to live inside people rather than above them. That time does not arrive with ceremony. It arrives when someone can hold it without asking for one. Prophetic language survives by abstraction. When names are fixed, meaning shrinks. When symbols remain open, meaning travels. This is why the most enduring prophecies are not timelines or identifications, but pressures, descriptions of what the world will feel like when guidance must change form. They speak of confusion that multiplies with information, of certainty that hardens without wisdom, of devotion that loses direction when repetition replaces understanding. These descriptions are not predictions. They are diagnostics. In that sense, the arrival being referenced is not an event. It is a threshold, a moment when inherited frameworks reach the edge of their usefulness unless they are carried differently. Prophets across traditions emphasize this edge repeatedly, when law becomes heavier than justice, when ritual outpaces conscience, when speech outnumbers discernment. They warned that at such times truth would not disappear, it would relocate. From institutions into individuals, from proclamation into posture. You recognize this relocation because you live inside it. You have always sensed when repeating correct words produced incorrect outcomes. You noticed when defending truth created more distortion than silence. This awareness did not come from rejecting tradition. It came from honoring its purpose. Prophetic teachings were never meant to fossilize behavior. They were meant to cultivate discernment strong enough to survive change. This is why the message avoids naming, claiming, or elevating. Naming would reduce it to belief. Belief can be inherited without understanding. Discernment cannot. Discernment must be practiced. You practice it when you refuse to simplify what is complex, when you delay judgment until proportion appears, when you accept ambiguity without surrendering integrity. These are not dramatic acts. They are structural ones. Across traditions, prophets also warned against mistaking intensity for truth. They cautioned that fervor without clarity becomes destructive. That caution is especially relevant in eras saturated with signal. You operate with a different metric. You measure truth by whether it stabilizes or destabilizes, whether it reduces friction or amplifies it, whether it can be carried forward without demanding constant defense. This is not relativism. It is responsibility. The idea that every prophet knew resolves here as convergence, not foreknowledge. Independent traditions pointing to the same condition do not need coordination to be accurate. When different systems describe the same threshold, it indicates a pattern embedded in human development. That pattern is active now. Guidance must be carried without spectacle. Authority must be exercised without dominance. Faith must operate without coercion. These are not new ideals. They are old warnings reaching maturity. You may feel the seriousness of this without urgency. Urgency belongs to alarm. Seriousness belongs to stewardship. You are not being asked to speak for prophets or to replace them. You are being asked, implicitly, to not undo their work by turning clarity into identity. Identity seeks followers. Clarity seeks function. The former fractures communities. The latter stabilizes them quietly. Notice how this reframes responsibility. You are not accountable for convincing anyone. You are accountable for not distorting what you understand. This shifts pressure inward where it belongs. It also explains why your life resists performative certainty. Performance demands reaction. Discernment requires space. You preserve space even when it costs speed. This part of the message does not grant authority. It clarifies limits. Limits protect meaning. Prophetic traditions emphasized limits repeatedly. Limits of power, limits of speech, limits of certainty. Within limits, truth endures. Beyond them, it corrodes. You honor limits instinctively. That instinct is not passive. It is trained through consequence. You're not here by chance. Feel the pull? Tap join to unlock truth, purpose, and a tribe that gets it. This is more than a membership, it's your calling. The arrival spoken of is the arrival of capacity to hold guidance without turning it into command. That capacity does not announce itself. It expresses itself through restraint under pressure, proportion under conflict, and patience under noise. You have practiced these without naming them. The message names them only to confirm, not to activate. Nothing here asks you to change direction. It asks you to continue without distortion. The work is not to reveal more, but to preserve what already functions. When guidance lives inside people, preservation matters more than proclamation. The prophets pointed toward this moment by teaching discernment before certainty. You are living inside what they prepared for. When prophetic responsibility moves inward, the greatest danger is not disbelief, but misplacement. Prophetic traditions consistently warned that truth handled without proportion becomes distortion, even when intention is sincere. This is why they emphasized patience, humility, and restraint more than revelation itself. Revelation was never the end goal. Stability was. What matters is not how clearly something is seen, but how carefully it is carried forward once seen. At this stage, the message narrows further, not toward instruction, but toward containment. You may notice that your tolerance for simplified certainty has decreased. Not because you reject clarity, but because you recognize when clarity has been compressed into slogans. Compression is efficient for transmission, but destructive for meaning. Meaning requires room. You protect that room instinctively now, even when it costs you agreement. Prophetic texts often describe a time when signs would be abundant, yet understanding would be scarce. Not because truth vanished, but because interpretation multiplied faster than wisdom. In such conditions, the task shifts from declaring truth to preventing its misuse. Silence becomes a form of stewardship. Discernment becomes a form of service. You have lived this shift without needing to name it. Blessed by His grace? Click Super Thank You and give $20 to spread His light. Your gift plants seeds that grow His kingdom. Be the blessing. This explains why you are not drawn to correcting every misinterpretation you encounter. Correction can harden positions. What you do instead is more subtle. You refuse to add fuel. You do not escalate. You do not counterattack. You allow distortion to exhaust itself. This is not avoidance. It is trust in structure over argument. Prophets used confrontation when silence would have destroyed coherence. You use silence when confrontation would. You may also notice that your sense of responsibility is not dramatic. It does not arrive as calling or command. It arrives as an internal standard you cannot ignore. You feel it when something asks to be simplified beyond integrity. You feel it when urgency pressures you to speak prematurely. You feel it when alignment would be lost by reacting instead of holding. This internal pressure is not anxiety. It is calibration maintaining itself. This phase clarifies why the message insists it was sent only to you. Not because others are excluded, but because others would try to use it. You do not. You understand that meaning is not a tool. It is a condition. Tools are applied. Conditions are maintained. Maintaining condition requires restraint far more often than action. Across traditions, prophets warned against those who would rush to claim authority once understanding appeared. They described how quickly insight could turn into dominance if ego entered the equation. You have avoided that not through discipline alone, but through disposition. You do not crave position. You crave correctness. That preference protects you more effectively than rules ever could. You may feel now that the message has stopped giving you anything new. That is intentional. When responsibility matures, novelty becomes distraction. What matters is not expansion of insight, but consistency of posture. Can you remain accurate when nothing feels urgent? Can you hold clarity when no reward follows? Can you resist speaking when silence preserves more than speech? These are the real tests prophetic traditions anticipated. This is where seriousness replaces intensity. Intensity seeks release. Seriousness seeks balance. You are serious without being heavy, alert without being alarmed. This balance allows you to remain human while carrying something that could easily become rigid or authoritarian in other hand. Nothing here authorizes you to lead, correct, or proclaim. It authorizes you to not distort. That may sound passive, but it is one of the most demanding forms of responsibility. It requires ongoing awareness without constant action. It requires strength without display. It requires patience without withdrawal. The prophets did not prepare humanity for a final voice. They prepared humanity for a time when voices would be many and discernment would matter more than volume. You operate naturally within that condition. That is the arrival being referenced, not of a person, but of a capacity fully formed. This part of the message does not move you forward. It holds you steady. Steadiness is what allows truth to survive saturation. Without it, even the clearest insight becomes another fragment in the noise. You are not being asked to carry prophecy. You are being asked not to damage what prophecy was meant to protect. At this point, responsibility no longer feels like something you carry consciously. It has become a baseline condition, shaping your reactions before thought intervenes. This is where prophetic preparation reaches its practical form. Not in teaching, not in declaring, but in maintenance. The maintenance of proportion, restraint, and internal coherence in an environment that constantly pressures toward exaggeration. Prophetic traditions anticipated this difficulty more than any single event. They warned that the greatest test would come when truth was widely available but poorly held. When access expanded faster than wisdom. In such moments, the danger is not silence, but misuse. You sense this intuitively. You feel when speaking would clarify, and when it would merely add another layer of distortion. This sensitivity is not hesitation. It is discernment sharpened by consequence. You may notice that your sense of accountability has narrowed rather than expanded. You do not feel responsible for correcting others or guiding outcomes. You feel responsible for not becoming inaccurate. That responsibility is quiet but constant. It governs tone, timing, and the choice to remain still when reaction would be easier. This is the disciplined prophetic language tried to cultivate indirectly, integrity that does not require supervision. This phase also explains why you resist being placed into symbolic roles. Roles attract expectation. Expectation demands performance. Performance distorts posture. You have avoided this not out of humility alone, but out of understanding. Once clarity becomes identity, it begins to defend itself rather than serve function. You instinctively protect against that shift. Across traditions, prophets emphasized vigilance over victory. They understood that truth rarely disappears through attack. It erodes through careless handling. You live with that awareness now. You recognize how easily certainty hardens into rigidity, how quickly conviction becomes coercive. Your restraint is not lack of courage. It is courage directed inward where it matters most. This is also where the weight of being addressed resolves. You no longer feel singled out. You feel situated. The message does not follow you demanding acknowledgement. It sits beneath your decisions, influencing them without drama. That is how enduring guidance operates. It integrates rather than interrupts. You may sense that your relationship with tradition has matured here. You neither reject it nor cling to it. You treat it as groundwork, necessary but not sufficient on its own. The prophets prepared the soil. What grows now depends on how carefully it is tended. Tending does not look like expansion. It looks like consistency under pressure. Nothing here promises resolution or reward. That absence is intentional. Reward would pull focus outward. Resolution would invite finality. The work at this stage is ongoing by nature. It is the work of remaining accurate in small decisions, quiet moments, and unobserved choices. This is where guidance lives once it can no longer rely on authority. The message continues to narrow until it becomes almost invisible. That invisibility is not loss. It is success. When something no longer needs reinforcement, it has found stability. You are not waiting for the next sign. You are functioning inside the condition the signs were meant to prepare for. This part of the sequence does not heighten meaning. It grounds it. It confirms that what matters now is not how much you know, but how carefully you prevent what you know from becoming harmful through excess, pride, or haste. Prophetic responsibility, in its final form, is not revelation. It is restraint practiced consistently when no one is watching. What stabilizes now is not belief, but orientation under pressure. You are no longer evaluating ideas for their truth alone, you are evaluating their effect, how they land, how they spread, what they distort when repeated. This is where prophetic preparation becomes fully internalized. Prophets warned not only about falsehood, but about truth handled without care. You live at that intersection now, where accuracy must survive contact with complexity. In this phase, you begin to notice how easily certainty recruits followers while discernment requires solitude. Certainty moves fast because it simplifies. Discernment moves slowly because it preserves dimension. You choose the slower path without romanticizing it. You do not see it as sacrifice. You see it as necessary to prevent collapse. This is not indecision. It is structural responsibility. You may feel that your patience has changed texture. It is no longer endurance. It is leverage. Waiting allows conditions to declare themselves honestly. When something is aligned, it persists under time. When it is not, time exposes it without argument. You trust this process because you have watched it work repeatedly. That trust reduces the need to intervene prematurely. This stage also clarifies why you are cautious with language that elevates individuals into symbols. Symbols attract projection. Projection fractures meaning. Prophetic traditions consistently warned against idolizing messengers instead of internalizing message. You understand that risk intuitively. You resist being turned into reference or example because reference invites imitation without understanding. You prefer function to replication. Notice how your inner standards operate now. They do not shout. They do not moralize. They simply register misalignment as discomfort and alignment as calm. This feedback loop guides you more reliably than external approval ever could. You do not need to be told when something is wrong. You feel it as friction. You do not need to be told when something is right. You feel it as coherence. You may also observe that your engagement with disagreement has softened. Not because you avoid it, but because you do not confuse disagreement with threat. Threat demands defense. Disagreement invites assessment. You allow others to hold views you do not share without needing to correct them. Correction, when forced, often strengthens what it opposes. You let time and consequence do the work persuasion cannot. This phase is demanding because it offers little reinforcement. There are no milestones, no applause, no confirmation that restraint mattered. Yet restraint does matter, precisely because it leaves no trace. The absence of damage is its outcome. This is difficult for those who need visible proof. You have learned to trust invisible result. Prophetic language anticipated this loneliness. Not loneliness of isolation, but loneliness of responsibility without audience. You carry that responsibility without dramatizing it. You do not imagine yourself chosen. You understand yourself as positioned. Positioning implies obligation, not privilege. It requires you to remain accurate even when no one is watching and nothing is at stake visibly. You may feel now that urgency has almost disappeared from your decisions. What remains is seriousness without tension. You do not rush. You do not delay. You respond when response will not create secondary damage. This measured responsiveness is rare in environments addicted to immediacy. It is also what keeps guidance intact when repetition threatens to hollow it out. Nothing here suggests finality. It suggests readiness sustained. You are not approaching an endpoint. You are maintaining a condition. That condition allows you to move through future complexity without amplifying it unnecessarily. You become a stabilizing presence not by acting more, but by acting only when alignment is clear. This is the quiet maturity prophetic traditions prepared for, a stage where guidance no longer arrives as instruction, but as internal regulation, where faith is not asserted, but practiced through restraint, where truth is not proclaimed, but protected from misuse. You are not carrying prophecy forward. You are preventing it from being reduced. What remains now is not a message waiting to be completed, but a posture that no longer needs guidance layered on top of it. When prophetic preparation reaches this point, it stops producing language and starts producing consistency. You do not feel compelled to interpret everything you encounter. You do not feel pressure to intervene in every misalignment. You recognize that stability is maintained not by constant correction, but by refusing to participate in distortion. At this stage, clarity feels ordinary. That is how you know it is real. Anything that still feels dramatic has not settled yet. You move through complexity without needing to label it as spiritual, moral, or symbolic. You respond based on proportion. What requires action receives it. What requires time is left alone. This balance no longer feels learned. It feels native. The idea of prophecy resolves here without spectacle. Nothing is fulfilled outwardly. Nothing is proven. The preparation simply succeeds. Guidance now lives inside restraint, timing, and the ability to remain accurate when no one is watching. That was always the goal. Not arrival, but reliability. You do not carry a title. You do not carry authority. You carry responsibility quietly, and that is enough. What was sent to you has integrated fully. It does not need repetition. It does not need expansion. It does not need belief. It works because you do.